I'm going to go through GWAVA Retain today. It's our archiving and e-discovery piece for GroupWise and for Exchange and for some other things that we're doing with BlackBerry and some new stuff that we have coming in 2012. So it's a lot of information in a short period of time, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. And, we'll kind of just stick to the important pieces, what it is. Not so much, how the software just works, but more how people are using it these days. I think that's a little bit more important. Archiving has been around for a few years now, so we do see some interesting use cases, which I think are maybe a little bit more useful than just talking about software all the time. But we'll go through, pretty much everything, and then any questions or comments or feedback, we always like to hear from you. So my email is there, tc@guava.com. Always feel free to contact me, and I love to hear from our customers or from even our non-customers just to hear what's going on. It's as important as anything. So let's jump right into it. So when it comes to Retain and archiving in general, regardless of what the solution is that you're using, I'm not going to go too much into the reasons why. Most people have a pretty good indication of why you need to do it, whether it's best practices, your GroupWise system, your messaging platform is growing a little too big, and you want to keep that running in a nice lean way so that you can archive off all your older messages and keep your messaging system running nice and smoothly. And then, of course, a lot of us are bound by compliance and regulations, and we have to do this, basically because we are regulated to do so. Of course, within every industry and every vertical and every part of the world, we do see some differences in how the laws and regulations are interpreted and applied and conform to. So, speaking with your compliance and your HR and getting all these different groups involved when you go through these projects is maybe a little bit different than what we're used to in the normal context of just going out and looking at a piece of software. But these days it's this type of project definitely expands beyond just the GroupWise administrator. And definitely gets a lot more people involved. So it's usually a little bit of a bigger project, and it really depends on why you're doing it in the first place. And then, the last point here on this slide is that, Retain is not a backup or disaster recovery solution. Very similar to a backup and disaster recovery solution. We're storing all of your email. We're keeping it for X amount of time, and you have access to it. But how you access it, why you store it, how you store it, the format, and all these things is very different than a backup solution. And typically, you're not going to use your archiving solution, no matter what it is, as a DR solution. So let's talk a little bit about the technology. So, the product that we have out there today is Retain 2.6. 2.6 was released probably 2 to 3 weeks ago. We have 2.7 coming already, and we have another release coming for May, and then we have pretty much the next 6, 12, and 18 months spec'd out pretty well for the roadmap here. So it's been an incredibly aggressive release schedule roadmap for Retain from the very beginning. We're close to 6 years in on this piece of software, so really mature at this point. And every version of GroupWise that comes out, we just get faster and faster. SOAP, since GroupWise 7.03 has been lightning fast for us. Great performance. So we want to just make sure that we support and adopt all the latest technologies that are available to us. So we use SOAP, of course, to connect to the post office. That means we get all the mail. We get all the internal mail. We get all the sent and received mail from the Internet. We use that trusted app key to get in and out of end users' mailboxes without knowing their credentials, without changing passwords and all that fun stuff, which is important, of course, because the message store, as everyone likely knows, is encrypted. Your platform support. From this point forward, we're going to talk a lot about flexibility, letting you go with the technology that you're most comfortable with, whether it's Linux, whether it's Windows. If you're running GroupWise on Linux, Windows, or even still on NetWare, we can support those environments. Jumping ahead a little bit to the architecture, when we look at the databases and the storage options and the platforms and so on, there's really 3 main core pieces for a Retain system. You have a Retain worker, and the Retain worker is a software component that's doing the data collection, enforcing your policy, collecting the data from the system, and sending it off to the second piece, which is the Retain server. The Retain server is where the Retain software is installed. It's where you're running your interface. It's where your end users are connecting to view their own personal archives. And then the third piece is going to be your database. And the database is really just a smaller piece here. It stores all the metadata, all the routing information, offline passwords, internal configurations, all those little things. And it only scales to maybe 5-7% maybe of the overall size of the archive. So it's a smaller piece, but it's it's optimized, and it's there for, of course, just storing the external type of metadata and information about the messages. There are other components, of course. You have your storage, whether it's one of the third-party devices or cloud technologies we support, or it's your SAN, or spinning disks on your retained server, and of course your indexes, and we're gonna go through all of those things. So multiple pieces, but really the three core pieces are the retained worker, the retained server, and the SQL database. All of these pieces you see here, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, Oracle, all of those storage options with Hitachi and Amazon and EMC. We partner with all of those guys. So all of those technologies, all of those integrations, they go through QA, they go through all the different processes, and when I mention this, it's because we're not just sending data over to these systems. We're testing them. We're making sure they work, and each one kind of has their own standards, I would say, in terms of how to develop and code with their APIs. Each one of the storage models, for example, has different different block sizes and different ways that you can write data, and they have different storage models. So that's just to mention that it's not like we're just punting data over to these systems. We're testing them, and we're getting the most out of their different storage models. And we have, of course, a few new ones that are coming in the future. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Speed and performance, we know that we're extremely fast. We have customers with more than 1 million messages a day coming in. We're handling that no problem. We have a true single instance storage model. This is one of the things that you always want to look at when you get into an archiving solution or selecting an archiving solution. Make sure that the product that you're selecting is keeping your storage costs as low as possible. This is something that for us, we have a lot of mixed environments, a lot of universities, a lot of companies via acquisition that are running GroupWise and Exchange side by side. So it becomes even more important. Exchange 2010, for example, does not have single instance storage like a GroupWise system does. So you don't want your cost of storage to blow up on you and run the cost of your project up, especially over time, depending on what your policies are. So the single instance storage model is just another bullet point on the slide here, but really, really important to keep that cost of storage down. A lot of people will say that storage is cheap, but when I get out there and speak to our customers and our prospects and to groups like today, we know that nothing is really that inexpensive. And sure, I can get a nice 1 terabyte drive at home, but when we're talking about enterprise storage, typically it's not that cheap. Our single instance model here is a little bit better than GroupWise. GroupWise will typically keep one copy of an email per post office message store, and where we're a little bit more efficient on that is in multiple post office environments where we do a single instancing of every email across the entire system. So if an email goes out to 100 users in 100 post offices, instead of storing it once per post office like GroupWise does, we'll store it once per system, and then we'll put the pointers out to the post offices and then further out to the end users' mailboxes. So we've seen cases where a customer has 5, 10, 15 post offices, and just completely, for example, 500 gigs on disk will come in under 500 gigs because, of course, the single instancing is going to clean that up a little bit. Compression is always on. Encryption is AES 256, and that's optional. And then you have other options when it comes to encryption if you want to use, the Synteras of the world. If you want to use file-level encryption, there's, many different things you can do there. Okay, so let's skip down to the bottom of this slide, and this is just kind of another review of the architecture. You have the retained worker in the middle. We're doing the SOAP connection to the post office, trusted app to the mailbox, and we're enforcing your policy, whether you have one blanket, take everything policy for the entire organization. If you have multiple policies, if you have policies that change over time, if you have policies for different post offices, for different distribution lists, for different users, all these different things that you can do here in combination with your policies. The worker goes out, enforces those, collects the data, sends it to the retained server. It's going to store those messages. Those messages are once again going to be on spinning disks, are going to be on a SAN, it's going to be on one of those third-party storage devices or up in the cloud, and then, of course, your SQL database, routing information, metadata, offline passwords, configurations, and so on. And then access for administrators, for auditors, for end users is via your web browser, And of course, we have some plugins for the GroupWise client, for the GroupWise Web Access client, as well as Exchange Outlook, as well as Outlook Web Access, where we have these single sign-on capabilities where you can click on a button or click on a tab in Web Access. It's going to single sign on the end user into their own personal archive, and of course, that's going to limit the amount of learning curve when it comes to the end user experience, which we always have to take into account, obviously, when we're introducing a new piece of software into your environment. So we try and really minimize the end user interaction with the system by doing that single sign-on. That way they can just click on a button, launch their browser, single sign-on into the archive, and away you go. Okay, so for me, I always stay in touch with customers and with deployments and so on, which is nice because it keeps me pretty much in line with what's happening out there in the real world. So when we talk about deployment and some deployment type of tips and strategy type things, this is real world stuff. I mean, this isn't just best practices or theoretical. This is what we see in practice. So point number one, go with your technology that you're most comfortable with. If you're comfortable with Linux, if you're comfortable with Windows, you're going to see very similar performance across both of those platforms. Really, really performant, really fast. We know that GroupWise on Linux is really, really, really fast. So if you can get GroupWise on Linux, great. We know that some people are going out to do GroupWise on Windows. That's fine too. It works like a champ, and we know that the performance is great. When it comes to your databases, when it comes to your storage, all these different things, just go with what you're most comfortable with. Even when it comes to a database, there's to me nothing more important than feeling comfortable with what you're doing. Point number two here, of course, is how the jobs are run. So typically, the first job that you're going to run, whether it's one post office, if it's 20 post offices, the first job is going to be this priming job. We're going to go in and we're going to take 100% of the data. You have 10 post offices, they're 50 gigs each. Well, we're going to go in and take all 50 gigs. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to schedule, either our nightly jobs or our weekly jobs, and it really depends on what your needs are. And there's many different considerations in between, and we'll kind of touch on that when we look at the policy creation. But in general, most people run their jobs every night. That way the jobs are smaller, they take less time, and we're only catching up from where we left off. And how that works is in conjunction with the Smart Purge or the retention services of GroupWise. This is one thing that I see as I get a little bit more exposure to other messaging platforms, Exchange and Domino and others. This feature in GroupWise is really, really sweet. I mean, you turn it on once, it works like a champ, and beyond that, there's really not a whole lot you have to do. The retention services, the purge services, these are for archiving solutions, they're for backup solutions, and really they're anti-deletion technologies that just make sure that even if an end user deletes an email from their client, it's going to stay on the server until we make a copy of it. And how those really look on the system is that they're a date and time stamp that gets applied to each individual user's mailbox. And when we run a job, of course, we're going to set those date and time stamps, and the next time we come in and run a job, we're just picking up from where we left off. That way we don't have to go back and scan the entire post office. We don't have to go back and scan, all of your data. We're just going to pick up from where we left off, knowing fully well, that these retention services and retention flags are going to, accurately give us the ability to pick up, all the email without missing anything. Down to point number three. This is really, I can never stress it enough. If you're going to bring in the GroupWise native archives, the personal archives, whether they're on a workstation or on a network drive, even at the very bottom of the slide, we have migration tools for some of our competitors' products. These things take time, and when we look at the GroupWise native archives, a lot of time they're scattered across the enterprise. They're in bad shape. A lot of people don't run maintenance on their archives. They're not running their GW checks. They're not running their fixes, and you're going to run into some fun stuff. And let's face it, I mean, even in some of the bigger deployments we've seen, with multiple tens of thousands of users, where part of the mandate is to bring these personal archives into the centralized archive. It takes time. If you're not running your regular maintenance, you're going to run into some missing message parts and some corruption and some different fun things. So it's not ever meant to scare anybody off, but it's just kind of to let you know that, if you're not running maintenance on your GroupWise archives, well, then you're going to, it's going to take a little bit of time. We also have to do the deduplication here because, of course, GroupWise native archives are not single instance, so you lose that efficient storage model when you use those archives. So we have to do that deduplication so that as we put these messages back into the archive, we're just keeping the single copy of them. Okay, great. So on to some tips here. Kind of some regular stuff, but it's good to put it out there. You know, keep running your maintenance. It's always a good thing. Run your fixes, run your database fixes and integrity checks. All good. You know, decide what you want to archive first. You know, have that policy ready before you start. It's maybe seems a little obvious, but you know, in some cases we run into some customers where they go and they just put everything into the archive, and then they come back 6 months later and say, well, we don't need half of that stuff, or we want to do a different policy, and that's fine. I mean, you can definitely modify and change your policies, but it's just really nice to start things off in a good way. Have a good idea of what you want to put into the archive, and keeping in mind that I would say really 9 out of 10, literally 9 out of 10 customers, they just take everything anyways. But you definitely have the ability to filter out what goes into the archive. So we'll take a peek at that in the policy creator. Your storage considerations in the world of GroupWise, really relatively easy to spec out your storage needs over time. We can put in place industry average for the average growth of post offices. Of course, there's going to be a few little considerations in there when it comes to if we look at the average growth of a post office. Typically, those numbers are calculated without taking into account the use of a smart purge or a retention type service, where everything is being maintained or retained here versus traditionally in the past without these services being enabled, where mail is being deleted. So maybe that's not a real true indicator of how big your post office either is growing or will grow into the future. So we've seen some cases where GroupWise post offices are growing at an alarming 50 to 70% per year, when maybe the average is down around 30-35%. So, having some type of a baseline always helps, but most definitely a lot easier in the GroupWise world than it is in the Exchange world to determine, especially with the Exchange 2010 not having the single instance storage. So in the GroupWise world, we can figure that out relatively easily and then give you a good indication of how much storage you're going to need with, expandable storage into the future. Of course, that makes it really easy. All of your server components, of course, can be spread out. We have the reload integration in the event that you have our backup software reload that you can archive off of your backup servers. That's not something that you always want to do. That's something that you're going to do in most cases based on necessity, bandwidth, some other concerns. We don't ever delete anything from GroupWise. You're still going to want to run your GW checks, run your reduces and expires, run that maintenance on your own. And the stubbing API, of course, the last point on the list here. This is something that was new to GroupWise 8. I won't go into it too much. It's something that we definitely support. It's a little bit different. I'll just quickly touch on it. The stubbing, what it does here is the real big thing for me anyways is that it allows the end users to continue using the GroupWise client even though you're archiving your email. And so what it kind of does is it removes the need for a new interface, the archive product interface, whether it's Retain or any other product. I mean, 99% of these products have their own interface. So, one way to ease that burden of archiving is to use stubbing. And stubbing, of course, is going to, archive the message off to the archive server. But instead of using the, proprietary interface of the archiving vendor, you get to keep using GroupWise. But the difference is that when you run these archiving jobs, a stub is left in the GroupWise post office. And when you reference that email via the GroupWise client, well, you're referencing up to 2K of that stub, and then the rest of the email actually resides in the archive. So, long story short, we definitely see some concerns over time when it comes to the performance of the system as well as the end user experience. Stubbing at this point in the GroupWise API is a one-way deal. If you start stubbing your email today, you cannot unstub your email. So it's just something that we want to help people make a more informed decision on. And if you want to know more about stubbing, give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can kind of go a little bit deeper into it. Really, it's just more so you can make a more informed decision before jumping out and adopting a technology just because it's new. Okay, quick sip of water. So what we have here, I'm going to just quickly go through some of the change logs from the last maybe 6, 9, 12 months. We've been coming out with releases, I would say, every 4 to 6 months, so it's been a very aggressive schedule. We're going to keep that up for the next 12 to 18 months and beyond. Like I kind of mentioned a little bit before, our roadmap is pretty much solid from this point out up until the middle of 2013. So we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of stuff, already in the product in the last 6 years, and a lot of things that we're coming out with in terms of new integrations and new services and lots of improvements. Obviously, we have to keep maintaining the existing functionality. So this is more a change log from Retain 1.8 to 2 to 2.5 to 2.6, and 2.7 and our May release are already in work. So we'll kind of touch on that. So the ability to restore a stub for anyone using group-wise stubbing, a little bit different. I'll just quickly mention it because the existing product as it is today, it can support both group-wise and Exchange from one single solution. So if we have a mixed environment where the customer is running both group-wise and Exchange, you can stand up one Retain server and you can service both of those messaging platforms from one Retain server. So when I'm going through this, I'm talking mostly about the group-wise integration. The product itself for using the Exchange module is exactly the same. Of course, the connection and some of the terminology and the architectures are different between group-wise and Exchange, but the Retain product itself is the same. So we're focusing mostly on the Novell integration here, the group-wise integration. But as we talk about all these features like PDF export and single sign-on capability and all of the storage options and so on, it's the same for both integrations. So it's the same product, but we're not so much talking about Exchange right now. So the migration tool, every time a new version of GroupWise comes out, of course we want to make sure that our migration tool for the personal archives is up to date. PDF export, we have a couple of different exporting technologies. I'll touch on that as we get into the interface. Single sign-on capability, we talked about that. Support for new versions of storage and databases, that's all kind of regular stuff. There's a lot more that went into version 2, 2.5, and 2.6 here, but I just put maybe some highlights just because I know, due to time constraints, I don't want to go too long on all this stuff. Support for the Amazon Cloud storage layer. We have the Microsoft Azure storage layer come out in the spring. The export to the rich client or the publishing client. This is the second piece that we have when it comes to our publishing or exporting technology. So we have a couple of different ways that you can get data out of the archive. It really depends on what you're doing and why you're doing it and who you're doing it for and how it's going to be used. So we'll kind of touch on that as we get into the UI a bit. We have a couple of different indexing engines, so I don't want to confuse things too much, but we do have two indexing engines. So one is a built-in indexing engine that comes with the Retain server. You don't have to touch it. You don't have to, you don't have to do anything with it. It doesn't require any special hardware. It just comes with Retain. I mean, that's what you get, when you buy your Retain licenses. And then we do have a separate XElite. And this is a third party that we integrate with that does require, dedicated hardware. It requires really beefy hardware, and this is really more of a Cadillac of an indexing system. So the difference between what you get with the built-in indexer with Retain is that can scale up to 2 billion documents. And when you look at an email, of course, it's not just one document. It's multiple documents. It's attachments. It's in some cases a MIME822 file. It's the header. It's the message body. So an email isn't just one flat file. It's multiple files, multiple documents, and of course in the GroupWise message store, it's being housed in multiple directories and databases, and all the message parts are in different places. So when you look at an indexing engine, you're not just looking at the number of emails. You're looking at the number of documents. So what you get with the Retain server can scale up to 2 billion documents. I've seen customers upwards of 25,000, 30,000 users, some with over 30,000 users, with various amounts of data, obviously in the terabytes of data, where they're still using the built-in indexing engine that comes with Retain. You will get to a point, once you get into the hundreds of millions of documents, into the billions of documents, where you're gonna start looking at using the more high-performance engine. So, those are the types of things that we can start on one today, and we can migrate to another tomorrow. Either way. So we can go from the lighter engine to the bigger engine. We can go from the bigger engine to the lighter engine. Really depends on a few things. How much data do you have? How long are you going to be storing it? and how is it going to be used when it comes to end-user access and all these things. So a lot of different, determining factors in all of these things that we talk about. But in most cases, most customers go with the built-in Lucene index, and then for the bigger cases where we have, multiple thousands of users and, some greater performance needs, then we can use the XElite engine. That is a dedicated server and quite a beefy one. I'll show the specs here in just a second. Part of the export to the rich client or the publishing client, we have a redaction feature where we can strike out sentences, words, and information that does not pertain to the investigation that is being carried out. Litigation holds so that we can make sure that, if you have a 5, 7, 10-year retention lifecycle policy on your archives, but you have an investigation or a threat of an investigation, well, you can put a hold on individual messages or on individual users' mailboxes. So that as part of your regular maintenance, the email for these individuals will not be deleted because, of course, in many cases we have to produce those emails, for various, people that are involved. In Retain 2.5, we came out with Exchange 2007 and 2010 support, and once again, for our customers with mixed environments, these platforms can coexist with one Retain system. We even have the ability with some of the stuff that we've done in 2.6 to do user mapping, and this is really cool. So when we come in here and we've got a group-wise system, we've got an Exchange system, we've got users that coexist between those two systems, we have the ability to map those users together within the Retain archive so that, Taylor C., who is my user here at GWAVA in the GroupLink system, and Taylor C. at GWAVA.com in our Exchange system, I can map those two users together, and when I go into the Retain interface, I can either browse, my GroupLink archives or my Exchange archives, or I can search across all of my archives so that I have the ability to, look across both pools of data and just kind of tie those in or federate them together for the end user. So the cool thing here is that you can support both of those platforms at the same time, without having to manage anything separately. It's all just part of the one product. And then, of course, some security enhancements and some of the other things that we have going on. A lot of different, fixes and enhancements and so on. I mean, our list is probably, 20 to 30 pieces per release, but I'll just, stick to the high-level pieces right now. Moving forward to Retain 2.7 and our May release that's coming out in the spring, we have a big integration with some stats and reports that is coming. I think I might have a slide on that. Yep, that's it. That's next. So we're putting in a big statistics and reports module so that we know that people don't just want to, have their mail in an archive. They want to know how many messages, how long the jobs are taking, how big your archives are, how big the archive mailboxes are. Have these reports emailed out to administrators. Manage your reports. How long are these jobs taking? Looking at all the different mailboxes and the archives and how big, and all your CPU and memory utilization and disk space and all. So really great stuff. We're really excited about that, and that is coming. That is slated for the 2.7 release, and we're probably going to wrap that into the spring release. So in the next couple of months, we'll start to see that coming out into our beta programs and so on. And then, of course, anyone who's ever interested in beta testing for us, you can always contact me on that, and we can always get you some pre-release software if you want to check it out. So that's 2.7. I won't skip ahead to the next slide yet. Some things that we're also working on for the spring release is going to be our new integration for Retain for social messaging. So we're looking at, we've seen a huge demand for it over the years. And a lot of times, we go to shows and people ask us, what should we do? What should we do with Facebook? What should we do with Twitter? What should we do with these instant messaging technologies? I mean, it's pretty much a whole separate subject where we can talk about the consumerization of IT and, all the mobile devices that are brought into the workforce and the younger workforce, which I hate to say. All these things are real and they're really happening, and people are using tools within the enterprise, and they're using collaborative and messaging systems that we want to enable for our customers, but at the same time, you have to secure these technologies, and you have to, have the same level of services that you do for email. So we see it going in that direction, and that's why we're really, we're hoping that, this is going to be something that, enables these types of technologies for our customers. We know that this is what they're demanding, and we're not just coming out with retain for Facebook and retain for Twitter and instant messaging. We're coming out with GWAVA for these technologies as well. So if someone is sending a file across an instant messaging client, we're going to be able to scan that for viruses. If someone is sending a message, on Facebook, we're going to be able to look at the contents of those messages and make sure, that they're not passing on sensitive company information just like they would in an email. It's the same thing in the end. So that's the way we see that going. And in May, we're going to have our retain and our GWAVA for social messaging release, as well as some other things, the stats and reports, support for the Azure cloud storage layer, and a bunch of other things in between. So lots of stuff going on right now, and we're already deep into the coding on this stuff, and we're going to have another big splash, another big release coming up in the spring, and then the next one after that is going to be in November of next year, another 6 months after that, and that's where we're going to start to branch out these integrations and do other collaborative technologies. We're going to have a mobile play. I won't go too deep into that, but we're looking at, of course, how can we provide the same level of services across, mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, and so on, where, it doesn't matter how people are connecting to the network, and it doesn't matter, what technologies they're using. We're going to be able to secure them, and we're going to be able to make copies of them and make that data discoverable, and that's where it's going. So really some cool stuff. We got a lot of stuff going on right now, and you'll start to see some of these things coming out in the next 4 to 6 months. Coming back to XElite, I'm just going to touch on that quickly. I have about 10 minutes. So this is, once again, the indexing engine that requires dedicated hardware. As you can see, it requires some pretty beefy specs. I won't go too deep into that. Those are the types of things that we can address on an individual case-by-case basis. And really, what indexing engine works for you depends on the size of your organization and how long you're storing all of your mail and so much more. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the demo portal, so demo.guava.com. I have about 9-10 minutes here, so we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at retain. What I'm going to do is just give everyone a little bit of a peek into my world. Let's go in and take a look at my own personal archive as well. This is one that for me probably speaks a little bit more in terms of, the real world use of the archive. For me, I have a quota on my GroupWise. Oh, what do I have here? 400 megs? Yeah, 400 megs. Come on. Geez, 400 megs. I can't do a whole lot with 400 megs. So, I'm deleting and getting rid of mail all the time. So I use the archive, several times a week where I go in, I do a search, I find what I need, and, grab that attachment, get that password, get the information, whatever, and move on. One thing that I'm going to quickly show here, I always show this. I always get at least 1 or 2 people who are interested. For anyone who's still on NetWare looking to go to Linux, this is, for me, several years, in the running here. But this is when I first got into Linux many years ago. I was a complete newbie. I was a little bit, worried about taking on a new technology. Windows is easy because I know it, so, I kind of bit the bullet and started doing a little bit of homework. And this one was really nice for me. It's a way of bridging your NetWare skills over to Open Enterprise Server or, Novell Linux. And really the differences between OES and SLES, there's not huge differences. I mean, there are some differences in the distributions, but I won't go too deep into it. But anyways, this is, just a nice way to kind of ease your way into the Linux pool. Novell's engineers go through these modules, and you get to listen to the presentation and watch the presentation, write a little bit of an assessment test at the end. So anyone who's maybe, interested in Linux, Novell Linux, but they haven't quite taken the plunge yet, send me an email, tc@guava.com, and I'll send you this link. It's a little hard to find. I mean, maybe you can get out there and find it, but it's down in their free learning courses and so on. And if you want to have a look at that, send me an email, and I'll send you the link. And I found it really useful just to get things rolling, because, of course, I've been doing NetWare since the late 80s. Holy cow, from the 90s and on. No, it's probably about the mid-90s, I guess. back in my college days. But anyways, it was definitely helpful to be able to look at all the things and the tools and the tasks and all the things that you do in a network system, and then all the comparable tools and the ways that you accomplish those same tasks in an open enterprise system. So if you want that, shoot me a message and I'll send that over to you. Okay, so now we're back into the demo server. The credentials to get in here are guest and password. I'm going to log in as an administrator, because, of course, I get to show you some different things. Okay, so when we first log in, we have our status and updates page. This is where we're going to see this dashboard for the reports and the statistics, so we're really excited to get that in there. Right now, we run some statistics on the jobs that we're running, how many messages are archived, which mailbox we're processing. We go through your address book from A through Z. So basically, when we come in and we set up the retain system for the first time, I'll just kind of show you. This is where you set up your GroupWise module. This is where you set up your Exchange module. Once the modules are configured, you can go in and set up your data collection. And we go in and we will cache your address book. And the reason for that, and it is an ongoing background process every 24 hours. It's really just to make sure that as you add new users to the system, to the GroupWise system, for example, well, you don't have to come in and manually federate your users to retain. We're just going to go ahead and start archiving those users the next time we run a job. So that's the basic reason why we do that. And then moving forward, you're going to come in here and you're going to start scheduling your data collection. So, all the items that we have here, your auditing and your search console and so on, your users and groups, and your deletion management, which is your life cycle management. If you're going to have a 5 or a 7-year policy, you set all those things up. And basically, once you've set up your data collection and set up your policies, you're going to spend 99% of your time in the search piece. Whether you're just a regular end user or whether you're an auditor or an administrator or an HR administrator, whatever your role or responsibility within the company is, that really is going to depend on how you use the archive. But you're not going to come in and be, in most cases anyways, modifying your profiles and doing all of this crazy stuff. You're just going to set it up. It's going to archive your mail, and then you're going to go in and do that, the discovery process, whether it's just as an individual or someone with a different role. So in this case, your schedules and your data collection in general, really straightforward. Schedule is when am I collecting the data. A profile is what am I collecting. And the worker, which we've already talked about, is who, or which distribution list or which post office or which individual user am I collecting this data for. So you do have the ability to break it down between the different groups. So we talked about earlier where you're going to run that priming job. You're going to get 100% of the data into retain. So you've got one post office, you've got 10 post offices. You go in, you get all the data, you get 100% of your post offices in, and then moving forward, you're going to run these recurring jobs that are going to just run maybe once every night or once every 2 nights or once a week, and we're going to gather all the information that's new, put it into retain, and then we just run those catch-up jobs, and that's in conjunction with those retention services. When I come into the profiles now, and hopefully this is refreshing well for everybody. So we're into the profiles, and this is, where we see pretty much the filters or the things that you can do to kind of limit what goes into the archive. Keeping in mind, we know that most people just take everything. So you can, limit by the types of mailboxes, by the type of messages. Were they received? Were they sent? Were they drafted? Were they read? Were they unread? Do you want to archive messages based on the age of messages? Do you want to use the GroupWise retention flag? Do you want to use the GroupWise purge flag? So, typically the purge flag is made for backup software and the retention flag is made for archiving software. They work exactly the same way, and we can integrate with either one of them, so it really doesn't make a difference. And when it comes to the item store flag, that is a proprietary GWAVA flag for when we're archiving off of our reload backup server. So that's kind of a side point. Take attachments, don't take attachments. Take the MIME file, don't take the MIME file. Little things like that, but they do save you on some storage space over time in the sense that everything that's in the Internet header is what you would get in the MIME file. So instead of having that little bit of extra bloating over time, everything that you're gonna see in that Internet header is going to cover that, so you're covered on that one. The routing properties, was the message replied to, was it deleted, third-party downloaded, whatever. So of course we get all of that. If you want it, that's up to you. And you can run archiving jobs based on subject, sender, recipient, GroupWise category, and then folders, whether it's inclusive or exclusive. What I mean by that is we have some customers who want to run policies based on folders. So you provision out a 3-year folder, a 5-year folder, a 7-year folder. You give the end users a week or 10 days to move messages into those specific folders, and then you run an archiving job against those folders. Or on the flip side, in certain countries where the right to privacy is on the end user, you give them a private folder, and then you don't archive archive what's in that private folder. So that's kind of the use case there. When we look at the worker, nothing too exciting to talk about here. You know, we've got our connection back to the retained server. We're enforcing the policy and sending the data back to be stored. And then moving forward, we're going to set everything up into a job. And a job is very simply a combination of a schedule, a profile, and a worker. And, of course, none of these are tied to one another. You can have a Friday night, midnight schedule, and you can apply it to 10 different profiles and 10 different post offices and 10 different individuals. It really depends on how you want to kind of mix and match those. Set up your life cycle here and say, okay, I want to store these messages for 5 years, and then that will tie into your deletion management, where you're going to run a scheduled cleanup job to run every 15 or 30 days, for example, and say, I want to, you know, wipe out any messages that fit the criteria of over 7 years, for example. And then the litigation hold kind of ties into all of that, where we want to make sure that we're not deleting mail, you know, for someone who's being looked at. Do I want to do my post offices? Do I want to do certain distribution lists? Or do I want to do individual users, whether it's inclusive or exclusive? So those are all the different things that you can do for the policies. You can have multiple policies, apply them to multiple different groups of people, different post offices, and so on. So you see that it's really simple to set them up, apply them, run the jobs, get the data into Retain, and then moving forward, you're going to spend your time in the Search Console. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to quickly touch on the ACLs. I know I have maybe 2 minutes if I stretch it. So the ACLs, of course, you have a really nice list of rights to kind of limit the use or the access to the archive based on your role or responsibility within the organization. Can you access the audit logs, the deletion management, the litigation hold features, and so on. And the big one, of course, is can you search all mailboxes? I mean, that's really, really big when it comes to GroupWise. And, you know, in terms of end users, can you view and save attachments? Can you export messages out of the system? Can you forward messages, and so on? So, you know, I'm going to jump in right now and kind of show that at work. When we look at the demo server, and I'm in here, and I'll do a browse, you have the ability to browse a mailbox or search a mailbox. I would say that most of the time you're going to do a search, but you do have the ability to browse. You see that I can apply a litigation hold. I can forward a message. I can export a message. I can restore a stub in the context of GroupWise. I can restore an email in the context of Exchange, print. I can switch mailboxes, and so on. And when I come into my own personal archive here, this is my production archive here at GWAVA. Well, you can see I don't have the ability to do litigation hold. I don't have the ability to do the export. What you'll see here is that I've got my mailbox, I've got my cabinet, I've got my dozens and dozens of cabinet folders, is, you know, the way I like to organize all my stuff. And if we come in and look at GroupWise, okay, well, here it is. Yeah. Okay, all my folders. So what you see, of course, in the Retain archive is what you would expect to see in, in the Retain archive. We preserve all that folder structure over time, but my rights here are very limited compared to the rights of, you know, the individuals that we see here in the demo server. If you want to come in and take a look at an email, okay, here it is. Yeah, we got something from the NGW list. I'm able to open and save, you know, the MIME file, or if there's any attachments, kind of normal stuff there. Go down and read all the threads. Great. Keep up to date with everything going on in the GroupWise world and the properties of the message, all the things that you would expect to see, the metadata, and then we have this little audit log, which is optional if you want to show that. So that's, you know, that's the browsing of messages. When you do a search, you know, you can look at all the things you'd expect to see: the subject, the sender, the recipient, the message contents, of course, you know, within Word documents and spreadsheets and PDFs. We can search within all of those indexed documents as well. And once you find everything that you need, well, the last step is to make it portable. And your 2 options for portability here, as I wrap things up, are going to be the PDF export. We see the PDF export used more in Freedom of Information Act type of requests, open records requests, things like that, where, you know, someone comes in, they need to see all the emails between, you know, this public employee and this contractor down the street, and we just take all those messages, we put them into this all-inclusive PDF file. The attachments and the properties are all in line, and these can scale up to 2 gigs, so that's nice and lightweight. And I know that I'm going long here. And then the second piece here, which will be the last thing I show, is the full publishing client. This is something that gets installed on a workstation, a Windows workstation. You, of course, have to have the right or the ACL in order to use this in the first place. And this is more scalable. You can go in and you can export or publish entire mailboxes, multiple mailboxes, And then, of course, it has a search capability. It has the ability to redact or strike information out. You can additionally export messages from this off to PST or PDF. And, of course, you can view and save attachments. You can forward messages off of a SMTP relay. And this is all in an encrypted database. So when you do this export, it goes out to an encrypted database. And if you want to do those additional exports, you can do that. I know that I've gone a couple of minutes too long here, so I want to just thank everybody once again for joining us today. I know it's a lot of stuff. It's a big product in a short period of time. And for Q and all the gang over at GroupLink, thanks as always for the opportunity to speak with everybody. It's really my pleasure. And my email, very quickly again, is tc@guava.com there if anyone has any questions. Love to hear from you, and just want to thank everybody once again for joining us today. Have a great week and great weekend.
And Taylor, it looks like we did have one question, if we could answer that one really quick online here. Just says, considering space issues, could you replace the GroupWise archives with Retain?
If you're talking about GroupWise native archives, I mean, they can definitely coexist. I mean, there's many differences here. I mean, when you talk about GroupWise native archives, well, number one, they're not single instance, and of course, you don't really have a whole lot of control over them. The end users are going to go in, and yes, you can have a policy to auto-archive after X amount of days and so on, but how do you go in and see those messages? So there's really just a huge difference between access to those, the storage model. I would say that, when it comes to, should you put the GroupWise native archives into the centralized archive, if you can get away with not doing it, then, man, that's going to make your life a lot easier. But if you have to do it, well, we do have the ability with the migration tool that we have to disable the personal archiving for the users moving forward. So once we've ingested all of their personal archives in the Retain, they're not going to be able to do the native archiving anymore. And that's really more policy-based. That's more to say, the enterprise or the company owns the email. This is what our policy is. You don't get to choose what gets archived. This is not something that's going to be external to our centralized archive. And most definitely on the storage considerations, you're going to save disk space, but you're going to gain control over these things. You're going to have the ability to go look at these messages and just kind of, just put it all together. Centralized archive is really what it is, but yeah, it's definitely going to save you some space, and it's just going to mean you're going to have a copy of these messages, and it's going to be a lot easier to manage than all those, disparate type of, workstations and network drives and so on.